He asked to end our engagement? Totally agree, a man who doesn't love me isn't worth keeping. Chapter 1: The Betrayal. The ballroom was filled with soft chatter, the clinking of champagne glasses, and the rustling of silk gowns as the city's elite mingled beneath the golden chandeliers. It should have been an evening of celebration, a charity gala hosted by the Holloway family, the very people who had once regarded me as their future daughter-in-law. But instead, it was the night my world shattered. Nathaniel Holloway stood before me, his dark eyes brimming with a resolve I had never seen before. He was a man of strength and calculated decisions, someone who had always moved with precision in both business and life. And yet, tonight, there was something reckless in his stance, something desperate. "I want to break off the engagement." His voice was steady, unwavering. For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. The engagement we had been in for years? The relationship that had been carefully arranged by our families? The future that had seemed inevitable, written in stone? I had known Nathaniel since we were children. Our families were bound by business and tradition, and while ours had not been a marriage of passion, it had been built on stability, on years of knowing each other. I searched his face for hesitation, for doubt, but found none. Then, he dropped the final blow. "I love Lillian." Lillian Rhodes. The college student we had been sponsoring together, the bright, wide-eyed girl who had walked into our lives as a scholarship recipient. I should have noticed it earlier, the way his gaze lingered on her during our charity events, the way he went out of his way to ask about her studies, the soft smiles that had never been reserved for me. The crowd around us had grown silent. His parents, seated at the head table, looked horrified, while my own mother let out a soft gasp. My voice caught in my throat, but I forced myself to stay composed. "You're throwing away everything for her?" "I don't expect you to understand," he said, as if that made it better. As if I was the one being unreasonable. "Nathaniel," his father's voice was sharp with disapproval. "Do you have any idea what you're saying?" "I know exactly what I'm saying," Nathaniel countered, his jaw tight. "I don't care about the engagement, the business, or the expectations. I love her, and I'm going to marry her." His words hung in the air like a death sentence. In that moment, I realized that no matter what I said, no matter how much history we shared, I would never be enough for him. The world around me blurred, but my mind was clear. I had two choices: beg for a man who had already chosen someone else or walk away with my dignity intact. I exhaled slowly, then lifted my chin. "Since the two of you love each other so much," I said, my voice eerily calm, "then you should be together." A murmur rippled through the guests, but I wasn't finished. As for our engagement, I turned to his parents, to my own mother, to the dozens of eyes watching this moment unfold. Then, I smiled. "Let's annul it here and now, in front of everyone." Silence. Nathaniel looked taken aback. Had he expected me to cry? To beg? To fight for him? Not this time. With one last glance at him, I turned and walked away, my heart pounding. He had made his choice. And now, I would make mine. Chapter 2: The Deal with the Devil. The ink on the annulment papers had barely dried when the news spread. Lillian Rhodes had vanished without a trace. It was as if she had been swallowed by the very shadows that had once lurked in the corners of my heart. The woman Nathaniel Holloway had destroyed his future for, the woman he had sacrificed everything to be with, gone. At first, I thought it was a joke, some cruel irony of the universe. But as days turned into weeks and no sign of her surfaced, the whispers began. Had she run away? Had she been taken? Or worse, had she simply disappeared because she had gotten what she wanted? I should have been relieved. After all, hadn't I already washed my hands of this mess? But fate had other plans. Nathaniel came back. Not as the arrogant man who had once cast me aside, not as the love-struck fool who had severed ties with his powerful family for another woman. No, this version of Nathaniel was hollow, desperate. And I should have laughed in his face when he said the words. "Marry me." I stared at him, my fingers curling into fists at my sides. "Excuse me?" His voice was rough, strained, as if he had been fighting a war within himself and lost. "Marry me, Juliet." My name had never sounded so foreign. I could still remember the way he had said Lillian's name, soft and reverent, as if she were a dream come to life. Now, he said mine with none of that warmth, none of that longing. He didn't want me. He needed me. And that was the worst part of all. "I thought you loved her," I said, my voice eerily calm. His jaw tightened, and for the first time since I had known him, he looked unsure of himself. "Lillian is gone." I arched a brow. "And that's my problem because..." He exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over his face. "My family won't let me undo what I've done. I gave up everything for her, and now, with her gone, I have nothing left." The truth settled between us, thick and suffocating. This wasn't love. It wasn't even regret. It was necessity. Nathaniel had lost his standing, his family's favor, his business connections, all for a woman who had disappeared into thin air. He had burned every bridge to be with her, and now, he was standing in the wreckage, looking for someone to save him. And that someone was me. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. "So, let me get this straight. You threw me away like I was nothing, humiliated me in front of everyone, and now that your perfect little fairy tale has crumbled, you expect me to just step back into the role you abandoned?" His expression darkened. "It's not like that." I stepped forward, my voice dangerously low. "Then what is it like, Nathaniel? Explain it to me." Silence. That was all I needed to know. I should have walked away. I should have told him to rot in the misery of his own making. But I didn't. Not because I wanted him. Not because I still loved him. But because if there was one thing I had learned, it was that in this world, power belonged to those who knew how to play the game. And Nathaniel Holloway had just given me the perfect hand. "You want a wife?" I asked, tilting my head. "Fine. Let's get married." His shoulders sagged with relief, but I wasn't done. "But understand this, Nathaniel, this time, I'm not the fool who loved you. I won't be the woman who waits for your affection, who begs for your loyalty." I stepped closer, my voice a whisper against his ear. "This time, I'll be the one in control." He didn't flinch. He didn't argue. Because deep down, he knew he had no other choice. A heavy silence filled the room. Margaret Holloway's lips thinned. "Juliet, dear, let's not be rash. Isn't this what Nathaniel wants?" I smiled, tilting my head. "I'm simply giving him exactly what he asked for." Nathaniel's hands clenched into fists. This wasn't how he had expected this to go. In my previous life, I had begged him. Pleaded. Humiliated myself in front of his family, trying to hold on to something that had already slipped through my fingers. Not this time. This time, I was the one walking away. Margaret turned to her son. "Nathaniel, is this truly what you want?" Nathaniel hesitated. For the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes. But it was too late. Because I wasn't waiting for his answer. I stood gracefully, smoothing down my dress. "Since we're all in agreement," I said lightly, "I'll take my leave." My father, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke. "Juliet." I turned to him and smiled, a genuine one this time. "It's all right, Father, I said softly. I know what I'm doing. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. Juliet, wait. I didn't. I walked out of the Holloway estate with my head held high, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was the moment that had defined my fate before. But this time, I had rewritten it. And Nathaniel Holloway would soon learn what it meant to lose something before he even realized its worth. Chapter 12, The Choice That Changed Everything. The Holloway estate was just as grand as ever, gilded chandeliers casting a golden glow over the opulent sitting room, the scent of expensive cigars clinging to the air, the weight of expectations pressing down like an iron fist. I had been here before. But this time, everything was different. This time, I wasn't the desperate woman clinging to a love that had never been mine. This time, I was the one walking away. Nathaniel Holloway sat across from me, his expression carefully composed, though I knew him well enough to catch the tension in his jaw, the slight twitch of his fingers against the armrest. He wanted this conversation over and done with. At his side, his mother, Margaret Holloway, sat with her hands clasped in her lap, her sharp gaze fixed on me like a hawk sizing up its prey. Charles Holloway, his father, exuded quiet authority, his displeasure palpable in the air. And then there was my father, Thomas Lancaster. A man who had always placed duty above all else, who had raised me to understand that our engagement was more than just a personal matter. It was a business alliance. But alliances meant nothing when love was a lie. Nathaniel exhaled sharply. Juliet, I won't waste your time. Lillian and I lifted a hand, cutting him off. For the first time, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Surprise. In my previous life, I had let him say his piece, let him wound me with his confessions of love for another woman. I had let myself be humiliated, desperate to salvage what was already lost. Not this time. Nathaniel, I said calmly, my voice steady, unshaken. I understand. A murmur swept through the room. Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. Charles's brow furrowed. My father sat up straighter, eyes narrowing as if trying to decipher my intentions. Nathaniel blinked. You do? I smiled, and for the first time in years, it wasn't a mask to hide my pain. Since they love each other so much, I said, turning my gaze to his parents, Mr. and Mrs. Holloway, please allow them to be together. The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret's spine stiffened. Juliet, dear. As for my engagement to Nathaniel, I continued, voice unwavering, let's annul it right here and now. My father's hand clenched into a fist on the armrest of his chair. Juliet, you don't have to. I turned to him, my expression softening. I do, Father. This time, the choice was mine. Nathaniel's mouth parted slightly, as if he wanted to speak, but no words came. He had expected anger, tears, perhaps even a fight. But all I gave him was indifference. Margaret's gaze flickered between us, as if searching for a way to salvage the situation. You must understand, Juliet, these matters require careful discussion. I believe I've made myself clear, Mrs. Holloway. I met her gaze head-on. Her jaw tightened, but for once, she had no argument. Nathaniel shifted in his seat. Juliet, you don't have to do this so suddenly. I let out a quiet laugh, tilting my head slightly. Suddenly? My eyes met his. Nathaniel, you've had months to make your choice. I stood gracefully, smoothing down the fabric of my dress. Now, I'm making mine. The weight that had pressed on my chest for years lifted. The engagement that had once felt like a cage, one I had foolishly clung to, was finally broken. And I was the one who had shattered it. Nathaniel's fingers curled against the armrest of his chair, his knuckles turning white. Juliet. I didn't let him finish. I turned my back on him, on the Holloway name, on the expectations that had once defined my life. This time, I would walk away first. And when fate came knocking again, I would make sure Nathaniel Holloway regretted every choice he ever made. Chapter 13, A Future of My Own Making. The morning after I severed my engagement with Nathaniel Holloway, I woke up to a world that finally felt like mine. For years, my life had revolved around the expectations of others, what I should be, who I should love, the future I should accept. But today, the weight of the Holloway name was no longer my burden. I sat by the window of my childhood bedroom, watching the golden sunlight spill over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of soft pink and fiery orange. A new beginning. My beginning. The door creaked open, and my father stepped in, his expression unreadable. "You've made quite the mess, Juliet." I turned to face him, my heart steady, my resolve unwavering. "No, Father. I've simply cleaned up someone else's." His lips pressed into a thin line. "The Holloways are powerful allies. I don't need them." He studied me, as if searching for traces of the daughter who had always done what was expected of her. I met his gaze head-on. "Finally," he sighed. "If this is the path you've chosen, then so be it." He hesitated, then added, "Just don't expect them to make it easy for you." I knew he was right. The Holloways weren't the type to take public humiliation lightly. Margaret Holloway would surely have a plan, and Nathaniel. Nathaniel was an enigma I no longer wished to solve. Chapter 10, The Fall of Juliet Holloway. For 10 years, I lived as Mrs. Holloway. A hollow title. A name that carried weight in high society but meant nothing in the confines of our home. Nathaniel and I had never been husband and wife in the truest sense. We had been partners in a game neither of us wanted to play, locked in a silent war where neither dared to make the first move. At first, I had thought I could endure it. I had believed that with time, I would carve out a place for myself in the Holloway empire, that I would rebuild the power I had lost the day I agreed to marry him. I was wrong. Because when the time came, when I needed him the most, Nathaniel didn't hesitate to destroy me. It began with the takeover. The company I had built from the ground up, the one thing I had that was truly mine, was stripped away in a ruthless acquisition led by none other than the Holloway family. I hadn't even seen it coming. One day, I was at the helm of a thriving business. The next, I was being escorted out of my own office by security, my keycard deactivated, my name erased from the building's records as if I had never existed. I had stormed into our house that night, expecting an explanation. Instead, I had found Nathaniel sitting in his study, sipping his favorite scotch as if he hadn't just ripped my entire world away from me. "Why?" I had demanded, my voice shaking with fury. His cold, calculating gaze met mine. "It's just business, Juliet. Just business." Those 2 words shattered the last illusion I had held onto. I had always known Nathaniel didn't love me. But I had believed, foolishly, that he at least respected me. That was my mistake. And it was a mistake I wouldn't be allowed to recover from. Because my downfall wasn't complete yet. The day my parents died, I didn't get to say goodbye. An accident, they said. A car crash that left no survivors. I wasn't sure if it was truly an accident or if there was something more sinister at play. But before I could even grieve, before I could gather my thoughts, Nathaniel struck the final blow. The moment I saw the men in white coats standing in our foyer, I knew. This wasn't just about destroying me financially. It wasn't even about breaking my spirit. It was about erasing me entirely. "What is this?" My voice was eerily calm as I turned to Nathaniel, who stood beside them with an air of practiced indifference. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped forward, brushing his fingers against my cheek in a mockery of affection. This is your retribution for breaking up Lillian and me. My blood ran cold. Lillian. The woman who had disappeared all those years ago. The woman he had abandoned everything for, only to end up with me instead. Even now, even after a decade, she was still the ghost haunting our marriage. You think I had anything to do with that? I whispered. Nathaniel's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. I don't know, Juliet. But does it really matter? I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, strong hands grabbed me from behind. I fought. I screamed. But it was useless. The last thing I saw before the world went dark was Nathaniel's expression, cold, detached, as if he were watching a business transaction unfold. And maybe, to him, that's all I had ever been. A transaction. An investment that had outlived its usefulness. Chapter 11, The Day I Chose Freedom. The moment my eyes fluttered open, I braced for the suffocating sterility of a padded cell. The cold bite of metal restraints. The distant hum of a fluorescent light flickering above my head. But none of it came. Instead, sunlight streamed through lace curtains, casting a warm glow over the familiar mahogany furniture of my childhood bedroom. A soft breeze carried the scent of lavender from the garden below. My breath hitched. I shot upright, my fingers clutching at the silky fabric of my nightgown. Not the white hospital gown I had last worn. Not the suffocating silence of Holloway Asylum. Something was wrong. Or rather, something was different. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed and rushed to the vanity mirror, my heart pounding so violently I could hear it in my ears. The woman staring back at me was younger, untouched by the decade of betrayal and heartache I had endured. No dark circles beneath my eyes. No weight of grief pressing down on my shoulders. It was me. The me from 10 years ago. The realization hit like a thunderclap. I had gone back. Back to the very moment that had sealed my fate. The day Nathaniel Holloway had broken our engagement to marry Lillian Rhodes. And this time, I wouldn't hesitate. The Holloway estate was just as I remembered, grand, imposing, a place that exuded wealth and power. As I stepped into the lavish parlor, a strange sense of déjà vu washed over me. The same heavy silence. The same tension crackling in the air. Nathaniel sat across from me, his expression carefully composed, but I knew him well enough to see the impatience simmering beneath the surface. To his left sat his parents, Margaret and Charles Holloway, the king and queen of the business empire he was poised to inherit. They were watching him intently, as if they could already sense the storm brewing. And then, there was my father. Still alive. Still strong. The sight of him nearly unraveled me, but I steeled myself. I had already lost everything once. I wouldn't let it happen again. Nathaniel exhaled sharply. Juliet, I won't drag this out. Lillian and I raised a hand, cutting him off. For the first time, it wasn't out of desperation. It was out of control. Nathaniel, I said, my voice steady. I agree. His brows furrowed. What? If you love Lillian, you should be with her. I turned to his parents and my own father, their shocked expressions barely registering. Mr. and Mrs. Holloway, my father, let's end this engagement here and now. Nathaniel Holloway. At first, I was relieved. Juliet had walked away quietly, without drama or protest. I had expected tears, resistance, anything but that calm acceptance. But as the days passed, something gnawed at me. She had been too calm. For years, Juliet had been devoted, ever the obedient fiancée, willing to endure my cold indifference, my neglect, and even my love for another woman. And yet, when the moment came to end it all, she had been the one to cut the cord with a smile. It didn't make sense. I should have felt free. Instead, I felt uneasy. I had spent years assuming she needed me, assuming she was incapable of walking away. But now that she had, why did it feel like I had lost something? I shook my head, dismissing the thought as I focused on the woman sitting across from me. Lillian Rhodes. The woman I had risked everything for. Her delicate fingers toyed with the rim of her teacup, her lips curving into a soft smile. You seem distracted, Nathaniel. I'm not, I lied. She tilted her head slightly, studying me. Are you thinking about Juliet? I stiffened. Why would I be? Her eyes darkened just a little, but the smile never left her face. Because you're not the type to second-guess your decisions. I wasn't. And yet, for some reason, Juliet's expression that night, the quiet confidence, the certainty, kept replaying in my mind. I had expected devastation. I had expected a broken heart. Instead, she had looked free. And that unsettled me more than I cared to admit. Juliet Lancaster. A week later, I boarded a train bound for the city. My father had offered to keep me under his protection, but I refused. If I wanted true freedom, I needed to build a future without the Lancaster or Holloway names overshadowing me. I had a plan. For years, I had been more than just a Holloway fiancé. I had studied business, absorbed the strategies of the powerful men around me, and learned how influence worked. And now, I intended to use that knowledge for myself. As the city skyline came into view, I felt a quiet thrill in my chest. This was my chance. Nathaniel had believed I would be lost without him. He had no idea how wrong he was. Chapter 14, The One Who Walked Away. Juliet Lancaster. The cafe bustled with the midday crowd, the hum of conversation blending with the clinking of porcelain cups and the hiss of the espresso machine. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the elegant space I had carefully built over the past year. Lancaster and Company was no longer just a name. It was a brand, a symbol of independence, resilience, and quiet strength. What once had been a mere concept in my mind had now turned into a thriving business, a place where I held power on my own terms. Gone were the days of being a Holloway accessory. I had no idea how much my absence had affected Nathaniel. But judging by the way people spoke of me in hushed admiration and curiosity, I had left a mark far greater than he ever anticipated. And apparently, Lillian Rhodes had noticed. She stood in front of me now, dressed to perfection in an expensive silk dress, her manicured nails tapping against the wooden counter as she stared at me with barely concealed contempt. "This is what you've been doing all this time?" she sneered, her voice just loud enough to draw attention. "Playing shopkeeper?" I set my cup down, lifting my gaze to meet hers with unwavering calm. "And yet, here you are. In my shop." A flicker of irritation crossed her face, but she quickly masked it with a tight smile. "I was in the area and thought I'd stop by. You see, I wanted to see for myself how you've been, surviving." Surviving. She wanted to make it sound like I was barely getting by. If only she knew. "Thriving," I corrected. "That's the word you're looking for." Her lips thinned. "You act so high and mighty, but in the end, Nathaniel still chose me." A few nearby patrons slowed their conversations, glancing our way with mild interest. Ah. That was her goal. She wanted to humiliate me in public. I exhaled slowly, amusement curling in my chest. How desperate must she be to come all this way just to prove her place? "Nathaniel chose you?" I asked lightly, tilting my head. "Then why are you here, Lillian?" Her jaw tightened. I leaned in just slightly, lowering my voice to a whisper only she could hear. "Because something tells me he's not as devoted as you thought he'd be." Lillian's expression darkened. Before she could retaliate, the doors to the cafe opened, and I felt a shift in the air. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Nathaniel. And Lillian knew it too. Instantly, she transformed. Her eyes filled with unshed tears, her lips quivering as she reached for my wrist in a dramatic show of distress. "Why?" she gasped, just loud enough for Nathaniel and everyone else to hear. "Why are you trying to ruin my relationship? Can't you just let go of the past?" Ah. There it is. The victim act. A few gasps rippled through the crowd as curious onlookers leaned in to watch the scene unfold. Lillian's fingers dug into my wrist as she sniffled, her voice trembling. I know you're still bitter about Nathaniel leaving you for me, but this is too much. Spreading rumors, turning people against me, why can't you just accept that he loves me?" I blinked. "Are you serious?" She sniffled louder. Nathaniel stepped closer, his gaze unreadable as he took in the scene. His eyes flickered to my wrist, still gripped by Lillian's trembling hand. I studied him for a moment. He looked different. Tired. Like a man who had everything yet somehow lost the one thing he wasn't supposed to. But that wasn't my problem. I exhaled slowly and turned back to Lillian, who was waiting for me to defend myself, waiting for me to cause a scene so she could twist it in her favor. Instead, I simply smiled. Then, with a single, fluid motion, I lifted my wrist and effortlessly removed her grip from me, as if brushing away a speck of dust. Lillian stumbled back slightly, her dramatic performance momentarily thrown off. "You came to my place of business," I said calmly. "You caused a scene. And now you're accusing me of ruining your relationship?" Her lips parted, but I continued before she could argue. "If you have to come all this way to prove that Nathaniel loves you, then perhaps," I said slowly, "you're the one who's worried." Lillian's face paled. The cafe had gone eerily silent. Nathaniel said nothing. I turned to him then, letting my gaze sweep over the man I had once called my fiancé. Once, I had waited for him to look at me the way he looked at Lillian. Now? I saw the way he was looking at me now. And it was too late. Taking my time, I picked up my coffee cup again and took a slow sip, before setting it down and offering Lillian the softest smile. "Thank you for visiting, Lillian. But I'm afraid I have more important things to do than entertain ghosts from my past." Then, without another glance, I turned and walked away, leaving them both standing in the ruins of what they had once chosen. Chapter 15: The Weight of Regret. Nathaniel Holloway. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Nathaniel stood by the grand window of his study, staring into the darkened sky, his fingers wrapped tightly around a glass of whiskey. The amber liquid swirled lazily as he took a slow sip, but it did little to numb the gnawing feeling in his chest. Juliet. Her name was a whisper in the depths of his mind, an echo that refused to fade. He had seen her today, truly seen her. Not the meek, quiet woman he had once disregarded. Not the Juliet Lancaster who had once waited for him to turn her way. She had looked untouchable. She had looked happy. And worst of all, she had looked at him as though he were a stranger. His jaw tightened. Lillian had humiliated herself today, and for the first time, Nathaniel had felt nothing but disgust. Watching her claw at Juliet, seeing her attempt to twist the truth, to make herself a victim in front of him, it had made him sick. Had she always been this way? Or had he been too blind to see it? A sharp sound cut through the silence, a door slamming. Then came the screaming. Nathaniel sighed and set his drink down. The fights had become a nightly occurrence now. Lillian's insecurities, her paranoia, her volatile jealousy, it was all unraveling, and the entire Holloway family was drowning in the mess she had created. Nathaniel. His mother's voice rang through the halls, filled with fury. Another crash. He closed his eyes briefly before turning toward the sound. Lillian Rhodes. How dare you? Lillian's breath came in sharp gasps as she glared at Eloise Holloway, Nathaniel's mother. The older woman stood tall, her eyes cold with barely restrained contempt. How dare I? You are the one who came into our family and turned everything into a disgrace. Lillian scoffed. I am the one Nathaniel chose. Then why does he regret it? Eloise shot back. Lillian flinched. The room was silent. Nathaniel stood in the doorway, watching the scene unfold. His father, Charles Holloway, sat stiffly in his chair, his gaze shifting between his wife and Lillian with quiet calculation. It was no secret anymore. Nathaniel was unhappy. And the Holloways, for all their wealth and power, had begun to realize they had backed the wrong woman. Lillian clenched her fists. This is her fault, she spat. Juliet. Juliet has nothing to do with this, Charles interrupted coolly. She walked away, and she never looked back. Lillian shook her head. No. No, you don't understand. Nathaniel, he still. Enough. Nathaniel's voice was quiet. But it silenced the entire room. Lillian turned to him, desperation in her eyes. Nathaniel, you don't mean that. You love me. For the first time in years, Nathaniel felt nothing. No anger. No attachment. No guilt. Just an empty, hollow space where something should have been. I chose wrong. His voice was steady, emotionless. Lillian staggered back as though struck. What? Nathaniel didn't repeat himself. His mother turned away in disgust, and his father let out a deep sigh. The truth had finally settled in. Juliet had been the one who walked away. And Lillian was the one who had never been enough. Juliet Lancaster. The evening breeze was crisp as I stepped out onto my balcony, a glass of wine in hand. The city stretched before me, glittering with 1,000 possibilities. A year ago, I had been a woman discarded. A woman trapped in a life dictated by others. Now, I was free. I had built something for myself, something real. I was no longer a Holloway puppet. And Nathaniel, well, whatever was happening in the Holloway household now was no longer my concern. The past had tried to haunt me once before. But I had closed that door forever. And when Nathaniel Holloway finally realized just how much he had lost, it would be far, far too late. Chapter 18, The Ruins of Choice. Nathaniel sat in his office, the weight of the silence pressing down on him. His fingers hovered over his phone, the screen glowing with a text he had just received. Juliet is out of the country on business. The word stung. He had known she was gone, his private investigator had confirmed it, but it didn't make the realization any easier. Every attempt to reach her had been met with nothing but distance. No calls returned. No texts answered. She was gone. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. For a man who had once been the heir to a powerful family, who had everything at his fingertips, he now found himself bereft of anything that mattered. His wealth, his title, it meant nothing without her. Lillian, on the other hand, had never been so relentless. Lillian Rhodes. The once immaculate walls of the Holloway estate now seemed like a prison to Lillian. She paced the length of the grand hallway, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor, her mind racing. Her world, once filled with promise and ambition, had crumbled. Nathaniel had withdrawn from her completely. She had no claim to him anymore, no matter how much she had tried to force her way back into his life. Lillian was desperate. But she wasn't stupid. She knew that Nathaniel's heart was no longer hers to command. The Holloway family, long her supporters, had finally seen through the facade she had built. Her manipulations, her deceit, it had all come undone. And now, her last chance was slipping through her fingers. But she wasn't going to go down quietly. Picking up the phone with trembling hands, she made the call she had been avoiding for weeks. The voice on the other end was cold, indifferent. "Lillian." "I need your help," Lillian said, her voice shaking, yet still trying to maintain some semblance of control. "You've exhausted all your options," came the reply, blunt and unforgiving. Nathaniel made his choice. The families made their choice. "You're on your own now." Lillian's world seemed to tilt at the harshness of the words. "You can't do this to me. I am the one he chose." There was a long pause, a sigh from the other end of the line. "No, Lillian. You're the one he left." The phone clicked, the line dead. Lillian stared at the screen, a wave of nausea and disbelief crashing over her. The Holloway family. It was over. The Holloways had spoken. Nathaniel had tried to fight it, tried to salvage what little remained, but the damage was done. Lillian had no place in their world anymore. She was no longer the woman they had once thought could be their future. Eloise Holloway, with her sharp eyes and calculating mind, had given Lillian a final ultimatum, and it had been met with silence. The Holloway family cut their ties, the last remnants of a time Nathaniel had tried to hold on to slipping away with every passing day. Nathaniel Holloway. His hands were shaking now, the weight of everything settling on his chest. He had tried to hold on to the life he thought he wanted, the life he had been taught to pursue. But in the end, it had only led him here, alone. Regretful. He stood up, pacing around his office, trying to force himself to focus. He had lost Juliet, he had lost her the moment he'd let her walk out of his life. And now, there was no way back. For so long, he had believed that Lillian was the answer, that she was the one he could build a life with. But she wasn't. She never had been. Nathaniel stepped to the window and looked out over the city, his breath coming in slow, heavy pulls. The world had moved on. He didn't know when it had happened, but it had. And he had been left behind, swallowed by the choices he had made, the opportunities he had squandered, and the woman who had slipped through his fingers, never to return. Juliet Lancaster. Juliet sat at a small cafe in Paris, a city that now felt like home. The quiet hum of the crowd around her contrasted sharply with the cacophony of thoughts in her head. She had built a life here, one that was entirely her own. A life free from the hollow, toxic influence of the Holloway family. She had come here to escape, to reset, and to reclaim the strength she had once lost. And now, every moment here reminded her that she had made the right choice. Her phone buzzed on the table, the screen lighting up with a name she had long since stopped caring about. Nathaniel Holloway. She glanced at it for a moment, her heart not even skipping a beat. A part of her had expected this. A part of her had known, even from the beginning, that he would realize what he had lost. But she wasn't the same woman anymore. She didn't need him. She had everything she needed right here. Juliet picked up her phone and, without hesitation, pressed ignore. Final scene. The next morning, Juliet boarded a plane back to New York, her heart light, her mind at peace. She had left the past behind her, and there was no reason to look back now. Nathaniel, Lillian, and the Holloways were nothing more than ghosts from a life that no longer existed. And Juliet had no intention of returning to it. As the plane ascended, she leaned back in her seat, a soft smile playing on her lips. The world moved on, and so had she. The end.